Mitchell is in Riverside, California. Mitchell, you're on the Larry Elder Show. Thank you so much for calling.
Hi, Larry. Thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure.
So in the midst of everything that's been going on, as a young white conservative, I've been told a lot to educate myself on the systemic racist problems that are prevalent in our society. And as I've been reading more, I've been reading not only about people talk about the police problem, but also the fact that they say blacks don't receive loans at the same rates as white people. Mm-hmm. Black-sounding names tend to get rejected more often than white-sounding names. And usually black people receive harsher sentences in jail and harsher punishments in school than white people. And so I'm just interested to hear your opinion on all of those general arguments.
Sure, no problem, Mitchell. As far as the first one, blacks don't get loans the same as whites do. It certainly is true that blacks are turned down more frequently than whites are. It's also true that whites are turned down more frequently than Asian Americans are. Now, if it's racism, why would whites be turned down more often than Asian Americans? It has everything to do with credit rating. A black man who once ran one of the major civil rights organizations in the country called the Urban League once said, when he was informed about the credit scores of these black borrowers, if you have bad credit, you're not going to get a good loan. End of story. So it's just not true, Mitchell. It's just flat out not true. And frankly, that falsehood is why we had the housing recession in 2007, 2008, because of the assertion that blacks were being denied loans. The Community Reinvestment Act was passed. Bill Clinton put teeth in it and said to banks, essentially, if you don't lend to underrepresented borrowers, we're going to hold up you for mergers. We're going to hold up you for acquisitions. If you want to put in ATMs, we're going to stop you from doing that. And they also use the carrot of the so-called government-sponsored entities like Freddie and Fannie buying up these so-called subprime loans and reselling them. So for all these reasons, there was pressure put upon banks to lower their lending standards. So a whole bunch of people who otherwise would not have been able to get a home bought a home, Mitchell. And then when the recession came along, they lost everything. And from 2010 to 2013, black net worth fell 1/3, largely because a whole bunch of people who were renting just fine were encouraged to buy a home, and it ended up being an economic disaster. It's a lie. Your second thing was about names, black-sounding names. People get called for interviews less frequently when they have a so-called black-sounding name. Again, this is also true, Mitchell. It's also true that black employers will also not call people with so-called black-sounding names. So if it's racist, how come black employers feel the same way? The third one you said was about sentencing. And Eric Holder mentioned that, gave an example of the longer sentences that black criminals get for the same crime committed that white criminals get as an example of pernicious racism. It is true, Mitchell, that the average black criminal gets a sentence around 12.5% longer than the average white criminal. It is also true that the average black criminal has a longer criminal record than the average white criminal. And when it comes to the sentencing phase, judges take into consideration your criminal record. And that is why the sentences are longer. The U.S. Sentencing Commission looked at this and said the reason for the longer sentences is for, quote, legitimate reasons, end of quote. Eric Holder in his speech did not that the Sentencing Commission said that the gap is for legitimate reasons. The final thing you said was that black boys get expelled from schools disproportionately compared to their percentage in the student body. Again, true. Question is why? Answer is bad behavior. How do we know that? Because this is also true irrespective of the race of the principal. Principal's black boys get kicked out more. Principal's white, black boys get kicked out more. School board, all people of color like Oakland, black boys get kicked out of more. School board, all white like Decatur, Illinois, black boys get kicked out more. Maybe, just maybe, it's because of their behavior. And Mitchell, what they're really saying is the teaching profession is full of a whole bunch of racists. Really? Aren't they a bunch of liberals, most of them?
Yeah.
All right, Mitchell, I think I've answered every one of your objections. I got to roll. Now, if you are in pain, you want out of pain, right? Well, so do your friends, so do your families. That's why you ought to order the 100% drug-free relief factor. Pete and Seth created it and then discounted it to about $1 a day to see if they can get you out of pain. After that, we're talking about less than the cost of a cup of coffee a day. And it can be at your door in about 2 to 3 days. Let's face it, getting older, exercise, or just everyday living can be, well, a pain. Do something about it. ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com, 800-500-8384, 800-500-8384. One more thing I wanted to add to Mitchell when he asked me about systemic racism. He talked about the assertion that blacks were denied loans even though they were creditworthy. Not true. He talked about blacks getting longer sentences than white criminals get, and whether or not the gap is because of racism. No, the gap is not because of racism. I explained that. He talked about the disproportionate rates of expulsion for black boys compared to their percentage of a school body. And I explained to him that black boys are indeed kicked out disproportionately, irrespective of the race of the principal, irrespective of the race of the student body, irrespective of the race of the school board. Maybe, just maybe, it has something to do with the behavior. And then he mentioned something that people often bring up to me, and that is several tests have indicated that employers are less likely to give an interview to somebody whose resume has a so-called black-sounding name. And again, this is also true. It's also true that black employers are equally skeptical about hiring somebody or giving somebody an interview with a so-called black-sounding name. The thing I forgot to mention to Mitchell is that so-called white-sounding names are also discriminated against. Names like Penelope, names like Gertrude. It turns out that employers are less likely to call somebody back with a name like Penelope, Gertrude, and some other so-called white-sounding name. So, these, if you have to go down this low to the coffee grounds to find something to bitch, moan, and whine about, doesn't suggest that maybe, just maybe, we're doing okay. All you have to do is name your child a non-black sounding name, and voila, her problems are over.